We finally reached the part where we're going to talk about the treatment or the approaches to financial therapy. One of the recommended books for this class is Financial Therapy, Theory, Research, and Practice. It includes all the evidence-based models as well as other approaches to financial therapy that haven't been tested yet. I actually have an approach in there called Narrative Financial Therapy. It's not evidence-based yet, other than my anecdotal experiences in treatment. But if you guys want to learn more about it, I included in this module a presentation I did on it a few weeks ago to some clinicians. So much more evidence-based research is needed to make sure our approaches are actually benefiting our clients. It's just a lot of opportunities for you guys to publish, and I'd be happy to help you get that ready. So one of the earliest clinical trials was by Clance et al. They explored how to use experiential approach in financial therapy. Experiential therapy is a type of therapy that uses humor, silliness, role playing, guided imagery, anything that can change experiences. His belief is once you get out of your head and the cognitions, you'll be able to get to the emotions and create real change. So the treatment was all about a 6-day intensive retreat setting where they did psychodramas, which is an approach to experiential therapy, meditation, and psychoeducation with 33 participants. They measured afterwards BSI, which is psychological symptoms like depression, anxiety, money attitude scales, which we've talked about, and financial health scales, which is just behaviors around money. From this table and graph, you can tell that there were several statistically significant changes in psychological symptoms such as OCD, depression, anxiety. Really, the only two that didn't have changes was somatization, which is the physical manifestation of stress. So, like feeling like your arms numb when you're actually anxious about something, and phobic anxiety, which is like the fear that that's someone's out to get you. A second is the money attitude scale. And again, during the follow-ups, not the post-treatment, but the follow-ups, there was changes in most of the areas other than just stress. This is really interesting because that means that the long-term changes were significant rather than just the initial changes that happened at the treatment. I actually think this is even more positive than having post significant findings. Finally, the financial health scale, and as you can see, there was positive behavioral changes, both right after this treatment and in the follow-up several months later. I work primarily with couples and communication and helping them work together better as a team. And it's so important when you're working with a couple that you have what we call multi-partiality, where you are looking at what's good for both couples, not just each individual partner. You don't want them to feel like you're taking sides or teaming up against one of them. And it's really important to remember that Gottman and Silver, Gottman is like the king of couples therapy, couples research. He found in one of his studies that it takes the average couple 6 years to come to therapy before marital concerns. And so these problems, these issues have been a part of their life for a long time. I think this is interesting to note that, like, as a beginning therapist, I think conflict scared me that I would get so overwhelmed that when I saw couples fight that I would think, oh, they're going to break up. You have to remember that a lot of them have created a pattern where the conflict isn't as bad as it seems on the outside, or vice versa as well. Countertransference, you guys might have heard about this in pulp culture, and it's the idea of the unconscious transfer of our feelings, our anxiety, our everything about past people or ourselves onto the client, like seeing ourselves too much in the client or seeing our mother in our client. Really, it's the idea of getting too emotionally engaged with our client, too entangled, to not be able to stay unbiased. And so you have to be able to recognize when you're being triggered by your client and when your anxiety is coming up for your client. And most importantly, to do what you need to do to deal with your unresolved issues so you can take your clients. I firmly believe we can only take our clients as far as we have been willing to go. That being said, you will over-identify with one client over the other. You will think one person's more right, or one person's more logical, or one person's more like you. And the problem is couples in conflict are dying for you to take one of their sides. And so you just have to make sure that you stay so impartial so people don't stop coming to see you because they think you're only out for their husband's interest. And remember, couples therapy can end relationships, and it often does, and that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes the healthy dissolution of a marriage is better than staying together with someone who's miserable. So for couples in conflict, you want to keep them together because individual therapy will often make the relationship worse. It's okay to be okay with conflict, but during its escalation, you need to slow it down, interrupt, summarize, and end with a closed-ended question to kind of simmer down emotions and reactivity so that the couple doesn't end up fighting about the way they're fighting versus what the actual conflict is about. As I said earlier, Gottman is the king of research on couples. He has a lab out west. It's called the Love Lab, and so many interesting articles and books have come out of his research on couples. One great book is The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, and he gives signs on how to predict divorce. In my own practice, I often use these signs to educate my clients and also tweak how they talk to one another to decreases the chance of conflict. So one of the first things that predicts divorce is what's called harsh set of startups. And that's things like, oh, you always do this. So by teaching your clients to use I statements instead of blame you statements, not to globalize, and to do more specific criticisms versus complaints is one way to kind of soften the startup. The second sign is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. This is the idea that these 4 signs are always going to be there right before the relationship ends. And like I said before, changing people's conversations from conflicts from criticism complaints is really important. So criticism is a specific action in which your spouse failed. Complaint is saying that their character is bad. Contempt, or that's conveying disgust in the session. Defensiveness, not listening, not trying to engage into a solution. And then stonewalling, which is much more common in men, is really acting as if you don't care, probably because you don't care. Their sign is flooding, and, and that's when you feel like they're disconnected, or the conflict isn't that bad, and all of a sudden it escalates to such a high point so quickly. And this is really connected to that 4th horseman of stonewalling, that it feels so sudden when the fight gets to a nasty level. And that's because one spouse is so overwhelmed with the constant fighting that they only know how to fight, flight, or freeze. And so there's no in between. 4th sign is body language. He actually can record couples without sound and be able to predict to a really high degree if they're going to get divorced based on things like their body language and also physiological symptoms like heart rate, sweating, or stress hormones. There are some gridlock issues in couples they are issues that will never fully be resolved. The fact that so and so doesn't like their mother-in-law, or that they will never be as neat as their partner. They're issues that probably drew them together in the first place, but now they have to learn to accept. And so helping your clients see the difference between issues that can be resolved and things they have to get used to is a really important part of couples therapy. Honestly, couples therapy has a low success rate, about 35% success rate, if you just base it on couple satisfaction outcomes. But again, the dissolution of a couple relationship is not always a sign of bad treatment. Sometimes that is a successful outcome. Um, Also, this is key. I hated conflict, probably from family origin issues, when I first started therapy, and I had to learn that is a way some couples talk. And what research has currently found is that when conflict is not nasty but positive and comes to with this resolutions, successful couples actually fight more than unsuccessful couples because they are really getting through the issues and finding a way to compromise or agree to disagree or argue and walk away. One of those outcomes that are positive. And then finally, one of the biggest money conflicts in couples is not about behaviors, but conflicting money scripts and not understanding the motivation for each other's spending behaviors or savings behaviors. So resolve those before you try to get a plan for their finances. Your final assignment is due this week, and that is writing a 3 to 4 page reaction paper of one of the ways you can imagine integrating financial therapy to facilitate more positive outcomes in your personal and professional life. If you guys are interested in an example, I wrote an article early on in the Financial Therapy Journal about how learning about financial therapy and taking financial planning classes really, really helped me personally. And then in addition, professionally. So again, email me or call me anytime you want to chat more about this, and I'm looking forward to reading your papers. Thanks.